What's up, Flannelverse? We are back for week 8, Sunday Night Football. We've got the Cowboys at the 49ers. Should be a fun game. Of course, we just got the big news that Rico Dowdle is a surprise inactive. We were not anticipating this until we found out, I don't know, half an hour ago, that he was feeling sick. Got to the stadium, started feeling sick. Now he is not playing tonight. So pretty huge news. That is going to skew things quite a bit for what we want to do here. Also might lead to some weird ownership because we got the news so late. Maybe there'll be a few people playing Rico Dowdle. Maybe we can get some of the players who benefit at lower ownership. So always fun when you get late news like this on Rico Dowdle. Now, obviously, you'd prefer it to come half an hour before the game instead of before inactives come out, because most people know to check after inactives come out. But still, impactful news, kind of fun. We're going to go position by position here, starting at quarterback, running back, receiver, tight end, defense, kickers. I'll take questions and build lineups at the end. I see you. Texas Way says, do a pick six, please. Honestly, I looked at the pick six stuff and didn't see any lines that stood out to me for this game. So my only recommendation for pick six would be just correlate, like take the over with your quarterback and receiver. So like you take the over on Brock Purdy. I really like George Kittle tonight, so maybe take the overs on Brock Purdy and George Kittle. They just added a Dalvin Cook line of like 32 rushing yards, which I think is a pretty fair line. You could consider taking the over there, but honestly, we don't really know what the usage is going to be like. But in general, like the way that I play pick six with NFL is try to correlate as much as possible. If if Kittle and Purdy go over their yards, there's a good chance that the Cowboys, some Cowboys are going over their lines as well. So I'm either mostly stocking up on overs or stocking up on unders if you think the game is going to go slowly and not have a lot of scoring. So that's my general advice for pick six. But I didn't see any lines that stood out to me as like clear misprices. That's the thing with they change the lines now to make them better as the day goes on. So nothing great here. Okay, I am going to start here with the quarterbacks. We've got Brock Purdy and Dak Prescott. I don't know to what extent Rico Dowdle being out, I don't really think Rico Dowdle being out really changes things as far as what the Cowboys want to do. I don't think that he's like the kind of star where they're going to be like, okay, we don't have Rico Dowdle, we can't run the ball now. He's not really. They haven't really shown a ton of confidence in him anyway. So I don't really think the Rico Dowdle news changes things that much. As far as it might a little bit. They might try to pass the ball more, but they really haven't established the run yet this year much at all. They keep on talking about doing it, and then last week 6 carries for Dowdle, 8 carries for Ezekiel Elliott. They just really have not done it. So I don't really think the news changes much, but I think both quarterbacks look good regardless. Dak Prescott, the Cowboys rank 11th in neutral pass rate. The 49ers defense has allowed the 12th most schedule adjusted fantasy points to quarterbacks. So it's a pretty good matchup, not like an amazing matchup, but slightly above average matchup for Dak. They pass at a high rate. So everything looks pretty good for Dak Prescott. Brock Purdy, 49ers ranked 21st in neutral pass rate, which is kind of surprising given that they're running Jordan Mason out there. They don't have Christian McCaffrey, but still 21st in neutral pass rate, slightly below average there. But the Cowboys defense has allowed the 8th most schedule adjusted fantasy points per game to quarterback. So both quarterbacks in slightly positive matchups for the quarterback position. Everything looks pretty good. Then it all comes down to what does the ownership look like, and we'll start with I'm in FanDuel. Let me change this. This is I primarily focus on DraftKings to start because the vast majority of the audience cares about DraftKings. I will at some point take a brief look at FanDuel, but I want to start getting through everything with DraftKings pricing, ownership, etc. And then we'll take a brief look at FanDuel once I'm done going position by position with DraftKings, just because not that many people are playing FanDuel these days. Brock Purdy, 14.5% ownership. Dak Prescott, 10% ownership. This game is in San Francisco. I like this number on Dak. I think Dak sub 10% always looks pretty good. He's got some pretty inexpensive pass catchers who I really like on this slate. So yeah, I think I'm okay with the numbers. Neither of these stands out as numbers that I'm going to jam. If I had to guess, I would guess I kind of flip them, get a little bit over on Dak, a little bit under on Brock Purdy, but don't feel that strongly about these ownership numbers. I think those are about right. Two of the better, captain plays on the slate, I think. In the flex, Purdy coming in at 49.5% actually is I want to make sure that Rico Dowdle is out of here, that this is all updated, and I'm not seeing him, so that's a good sign. Zeke at 15%. That's obviously going to change. Zeke is going to become quite chalky. Let me just see if I can reset this. I think a lot of sites, they'll, take the player who's out of the system and then adjust ownership for the players who are affected later on. So we'll have to wait and see. It's going to affect ownership kind of across the board, I think. So unfortunately, we don't have the most updated ownership at the moment, but we'll do our best with it. I don't think that the quarterbacks change that much. So 49.5% going to Brock Purdy in the flex, 44% going to Dak Prescott. Again, I think I'll probably be slightly over that number on Dak Prescott. I don't know that I feel that strongly about the Brock Purdy number. 50% feels about right. I haven't made my lineups yet. Maybe let me just check real quick if other places have updated ownership, because I'm curious to see if Zeke becoming a lot more popular because he's so cheap and now he's a starting running back. The kind of effect of that on other players is typically these quarterbacks, because they're more expensive, that's part of what makes it difficult to get them into your lineups. But now that you have Zeke looking like a smash play at 2,400, now it becomes easier to fit those quarterbacks in. So it is going to affect ownership. And I kind of want to see, check some other sites, see if the ownership is updated for the news there for Zeke being probably pretty chalky. And no, it does not look like anywhere has yet, which makes sense because there's a little bit of a lag in updated ownership, because every site's ownership is affected by the projections of all the competitors. So they all have to kind of wait and play the game and see, okay, where are they projecting Zeke? If you use their stuff, what is the ownership going to look like, et cetera, et cetera. So makes sense that it's going to take a little bit of time, but I'm just going to have this stuff. I'm setting this stuff up right now. So once this stuff is updated, I'll be able to adjust on the fly. Just checking a couple things here. Yeah, it doesn't look like anywhere has a ton of ownership going to Zeke yet, and that is obviously not going to be the case. Dalvin Cook also is active for this game. Well, let me finish the quarterback conversation before we get into the running backs. I wanted to check it just because this all does. Ooh, Dylan Court says Lad McConkey gets there. That's good to hear. Crutch is what happened. Did you lose your seat? I saw you were right on the verge of potentially getting a dog bowl seat. Delvin captain final answer. Shit, great past. That sucks. Sorry, man. Quarterbacks, again, this is the ownership is going to change. I think it's probably going to affect CeeDee Lamb more than anybody, because CeeDee Lamb coming in at 39%. I would guess that he jumps up both in the captain and the flex, with Zeke now being a pretty strong option. But I kind of want to wait and see. But at these ownership levels, no real strong takes other than they look fine. They're quarterbacks on a one-game slate. They're going to project well. They're probably going to put up points that you want. We have some pretty good mid-range options, I guess. We don't have a ton of like true studs on the slate, like obviously CeeDee Lamb, Jordan Mason, Debo, and then I love Kittle, but I guess you can consider Kittle a stud. Ferguson to some extent, but like we don't have that many players projected above like 15 fantasy points. We've just got these four projected above 15 fantasy points, so it's not. So it makes sense for all four of these top guys to get a fair amount of ownership. As far as how I'm playing the quarterbacks, I'm always stacking, and I'm multi-stacking when I have the quarterback in the captain spot. Purdy's a little bit, he's rushed more this year than he had in the past, but I still think I'm always going to be stacking Purdy and double stacking, at least double stacking when I have him in the captain spot. So you could consider playing Purdy in some spots, in the flex unstacked. He has a couple of rushing touchdowns this year. It's possible for him to get there without a pass catcher, but I think it is pretty unlikely. Okay. I'm going to move on to running backs, just because we, kind of want to wait on the ownership there. I guess, unfortunately, we kind of want to wait on the ownership, obviously, on running backs also. It's going to affect things quite a bit. Like if Zeke comes in at 60% owned, Zeke is pretty bad. Like I would be okay fading it if he comes in 60%, or at least it's not going to be like, you remember earlier in the year we had the Christian McCaffrey was out news, and I was super into Jordan Mason because I thought Jordan Mason is a slam dunk in this spot. Zeke he's probably pretty close to that, but if he comes in at 60%, it's a question whether I'll get over that number. If he comes in at 90%, I would largely fade, I think, with Zeke. If he comes in at 25%, I'll go way over that number. So it really is pretty ownership dependent for me with Zeke. But I do think I think he's going to have the majority of the role here. We don't know for sure that he's going to because we do have Dalvin Cook active. We don't really know what the Cowboys think of Dalvin Cook. But I'm kind of stalling to see if ownership updates here. But I'm going to go to Coach Speak Index and see, just read the quotes on Dalvin Cook. So this is from John Machota. John Machota on Twitter. This is posted in the Coach Speak Index Discord. But John said, Cowboys coach Mike McCarthy, when asked if he sees an opportunity for running back Dalvin Cook Sunday night in San Francisco, he said, I think the biggest thing for us is we're taking the full week. Dalvin is ready. I really like the work that he's putting in. I think he's definitely in position to play. And he is active. And without Rico Dowdle, I kind of think I'd be sort of surprised if they just play Ezekiel Elliott the entire game. Unfortunately, I think both of these running backs are pretty washed. Like, I don't think, I see people in chat talking about Zeke being washed. I think Dalvin Cook is too. So, I don't think they really have a great option without, you could argue even with Rico Dowdle there, but without Rico Dowdle, down to Zeke or Dalvin Cook, and I don't think either of them was very efficient last year. Let me just update ownership, see if anything has changed here. Didn't look like that did anything. Try reloading the whole page, and if this doesn't work, maybe I'll just peek really quickly at the blitz in the flex. Okay, now we've got Zeke up to 29.5%. So he's 2,400 starting running back. That's a slam dunk. If he comes in at 29.5%, I'm going to be well over the field on Zeke. That is a really strong number for a starting running back at 2,400. It's possible for him to fail, but he's going to have so many opportunities to succeed that, I'm going to love Zeke if this comes in as the true number. If he's under like 40% owned, I think I'm going to be overweight to Zeke. It's very, very much an ownership game there. And currently the ownership game for me is saying, I want to play this guy. Where is Dalvin Cook? Oh, Dalvin Cook. Interesting. So Dalvin Cook coming in at 23% ownership here. His projection is 7. Zeke's is 8. So RotoGrind is predicting kind of a split between Dalvin Cook and Zeke. I think you can play both. I think you could, I would guess that in cash you want to play both. I don't really play cash on Showdown, so I don't know that I would say that for sure, but I think just based on the price tags, you would probably just eat it and play both Cook and Zeke in cash, and then that allows you to pay up for quarterbacks, CeeDee Lamb, and I don't know, George Kittle or what else, or maybe we can get to Jordan Mason. I don't actually know. Maybe we'll play around with that later. Jake says Zeke has a 3.0 yard per carry. Give me the unknown with Cook, but we kind of know Cook too. But ultimately, I like both. I think the ownership is low on both of them. I'm more confident that Zeke is going to have a role here than Dalvin Cook. Zeke just last week, and actually, let me pull this up. So if we just look at the Cowboys usage from last week, wait, do I have this? Yeah, I have it up. Okay, good. Or I should say their last game, because they had a bye last week. But in their last game, Zeke had 8 carries, played 40% of snaps to Rico Dowdle's 29%. Zeke was taking on a bigger, which I didn't anticipate that. After week 5, we had Rico Dowdle had 20 carries for 87 yards. He had a receiving touchdown, looked awesome. And it was against Pittsburgh. So all the analysis was, wow, the Cowboys have found their running back. They're finally letting Rico go. And then they followed it up with this performance where Rico Dowdle had 5 carries to Ezekiel Elliott's 8. Ezekiel Elliott also ran more routes than Rico Dowdle. So they had the bye week. Sometimes teams change things up after the bye, and they've had some time to work Dalvin Cook in. So it is possible, I suppose, that they just say, you've had time here now. It hasn't been working with Zeke. We should just give Dalvin Cook the bulk of the workload. That's possible. But I think I'm pretty confident that Zeke is going to have a role. I think that there is some possibility, at least not a huge possibility, but there is some possibility that it's just Zeke. Like Zeke has the entire workload to himself. I feel like it's a lot less likely that it's just Delvin Cook. I think Zeke has a definite role. Whether he could be the RB2 to Delvin Cook being the RB1, that I think is within the range of outcomes. I would be pretty surprised if it's just Delvin Cook has 20 carries and Zeke doesn't touch the ball. There's also a good chance that they don't have 20 carries total for the entire team, to be clear. But I think Zeke to me is the safer of the two. I like both. Oh, that's a good question. Did Deuce Vaughn get called up? Does he have a projection here? I didn't even think about Deuce Vaughn. That's an interesting point. I don't think he would have much of a role anyway. But let me look into that. Does anybody, or if any of you want to look into it and let me know if Deuce Vaughn is active? Haven't thought about what his status is. Actually, let me pull up here. Fantasy points projections also. Are they giving Deuce any kind of projection? Because he has not been playing at all, but they're giving Deuce Vaughn a projection of 2.7, and he's the min price. They're giving Delvin Cook, interesting. They're giving Deuce Vaughn the higher projection than Delvin Cook. Hunter Lipke higher than both of them, and Zeke the highest. So they have clearly Zeke as the highest, which I agree with. Zeke should have the highest projection. I don't know. It's possible. It's possible that let me look at some other places. It's pretty interesting to see. I don't think RotoGrinders gave Deuce any kind of a role here. Anthony says I got an alert that Vaughn is inactive. All right, let me double check that, because that obviously affects things. Okay. Inactives. Yes. Well, that's according to Tommy Yarish. Let me see. Cowboys public relations. I'm not seeing Deuce Vaughn inactive. So I'm seeing sort of, it didn't stand out to me, but actually I have this pulled up. No, I think Deuce Vaughn is, it's possible that he's inactive because he wasn't called up from the practice squad, though. Yeah, I did not think to check Deuce Vaughn's status. So apologies. Let me just look at this. I have seen some places report that he's inactive. Oh, no. Deuce Vaughn is active. Okay. Yeah, looks like Deuce Vaughn is active. So we have, and he was on the field warming up. So yeah, I think Deuce Vaughn is active. So I think it was misinformation that he was inactive. It looks like all three running backs are going to be active tonight. And I'm just going to, again, check all of the other that I have access to see where they have. I mean, man, everywhere has Zeke, sub 30% owned. And I'm very interested in Zeke at sub 30% ownership. I think he is going to be the lead dog here. Delvin Cook, okay, sub 20% here. That to me is really interesting at 1,000. Deuce Vaughn to me is okay. And they have Deuce Vaughn for like virtually zero ownership, but some ownership here. This is important. So apologies. I'm taking some time because this is like the most important spot on the slate. And I want to make sure I get it right, have a good understanding of what the ownership is. Okay. They have Zeke at sub 25%, multiple places, sub 25%, sub 20% for Cook. I like all of that. And Deuce Vaughn, okay, they're giving him some projection. So he is active and virtually zero ownership. He's sort of interesting at 200. I think so. To me, it's still clearly Zeke is my favorite of the Cowboys. I just think that he is like definitely the most likely to be. Oh, did Jaleel McLaughlin just score a touchdown? I just got a text from Scott. My favorite is Zeke. Like just he's getting sub 25% projected ownership across the industry, most places. I think that he has the clearest role. Like I think he is the safest of the running backs. I think it would be Delvin Cook number 2 for me. I think Delvin Cook probably has is the likeliest to be the RB2 in Dallas, and then Deuce Vaughn I'm not sure that he's going to have much of a role. He was on the field warming up with the other two. It's possible he does, and he is min priced. So I actually think all three of the Dallas running backs are pretty interesting, and that's not counting Hunter Lipke, who is kind of his own thing. He's a fullback. He has some role on the team already. But yeah, just if I'm ranking the Cowboys running backs, it would be Zeke pretty clearly number one for me. Dalvin Cook number two. Um, it's pretty close between Lipke and Deuce Vaughn. I think both are in play, but not like awesome plays. Let's take because I don't think Lipke is like likely to take on a huge workload. I don't think his workload really changes that much with Rico Dotto. I could be wrong. He's 400 on the season. He has 8 targets, 24.4% route participation. He has 4 carries. He's a big kid. They could use him at the goal line. So I think he's like playable in the same way that like Kyle Juszczyk is. You're just hoping he's a little bit cheaper than Kyle Juszczyk. You're hoping for a couple catches and a touchdown. It could happen. It's not super likely. But my clear favorites are Ezekiel Elliott number one, number two. After those two, I think it's maybe even I might even put Deuce Vaughn ahead of Hunter Lipke. I think both are in play. I guess Deuce Vaughn is getting lower ownership. What is Lipke's ownership at now? Because he's been in play all along. Lipke, yeah, I guess getting 5.5% ownership. Do we have a projection here for Deuce Vaughn? I don't think they have a projection at all for Deuce Vaughn. Let me just reset one more time. And actually, I'm going to take just a quick peek at the blitz. I want to see if they have a projection for Deuce Vaughn at all. Yeah, giving Deuce Vaughn 0 ownership projection of that's kind of similar around the industry. I might actually prefer now, factoring in ownership projections, Lipke getting just a little bit more ownership. The floor for Deuce Vaughn is a hard 0, and it's not an unrealistic floor at all. He might not actually see the field all that much, but I still think I prefer him slightly over Lipke, just because he has slightly more of a possibility, I think, of becoming like an actual running back. Like Lipke, I think is sort of just stuck in his role as he's a fullback. He might see a few touches in the game. And they've used him a little bit. He's had some weeks where they've had a few targets, I think. But Deuce Vaughn is, could take on a like contingent upside role if one of the other running backs goes down. Might not even need that. He might just be ahead of Dalvin Cook. So I think all things considered, I have a slight preference for Deuce Vaughn over Hunter Lipke. But the big ones for me are I love Ezekiel Elliott at this ownership. Dalvin Cook, I think, is a pretty strong play as well at sub 20% ownership. I think there's a really good chance that he has a big role. Deuce Vaughn is a like large field tournament. He is not going to be very highly owned and might have a bigger role than we're expecting. So I do really like it at really low ownership, but it's a dart throw. Like he's probably not going to have a huge role. And Hunter Lipke, how did he post in Discord just now? I didn't. Did you get a notification from me in Discord? Because I definitely did not. Hunter Lipke just kind of stays in the same role, and he's a fine dart throw at around 5% ownership, but not like a role that I super love. Yeah, it's exactly right, Hoosier. He's a pass catching fullback, gets a couple carries. He could get a goal line carry, like he's a big guy who could handle it, but hasn't done a ton of that. He's not guaranteed to. Also, that's good note from Comment God. I did make a recommendation. So if you're not already in the Flannelverse Discord, the link is in the description of this video. I do think that there is a spot where you can take advantage of this Rico Dowdle news. I posted it in the DFS portion of my Discord. So if you're looking for some way to take advantage, because where maybe people won't get onto it like they did, like they will in DFS, I did make a suggestion in my Discord. So recommend joining if you have not already done so. By the way, if you haven't already subscribed to the channel, would appreciate. I'm trying to get to 5,000 by the end of the football season. It's getting more difficult as the season goes on. It's harder to get new subscribers as the season goes on. So if you would subscribe, I would greatly appreciate it. Of course, liking the video helps. Commenting, all of that is very helpful for me. Okay. I think that does it for the Cowboys running backs. enough times. I give my synopsis of, yes, I love Zeke at this ownership. I think Dalvin Cook is a really strong play at sub 20% ownership. I think Deuce Vaughn is an intriguing, like super low owned play. And Hunter Lipke role doesn't really change, I don't think, but I think he is playable. So let's move on to the Niners side of the game. Jordan Mason, obviously one of the best projected plays on the slate, also one of the most expensive plays on the slate. The downside to Jordan Mason, not really involved in the passing game all that much. So like really helps your floor if you do see a lot of targets. He's seen less than 2 targets, just 12 targets in the season in 7 games. So less than 2 targets per game. I know he did miss like half of one game at least, but just not super involved in the passing game. He is running a lot of routes, 53.1% route participation. So I keep on being hopeful that maybe they'll start passing to him a little bit more because he's running those routes. Could happen any game. So far, they just haven't really trusted him in the passing game, but he's at least running the route. So if he just, we just saw it, man. Who was it on Thursday? Oh yeah, it was the most frustrating thing for me because I didn't really like Kyron Williams because he's not really involved in the passing game, and then he had like 8 targets or something in the game, something ridiculous after seeing like 15 over the first 6 weeks. So can happen, could happen here with Jordan Mason, but not really a part of the game, at least not how they've used him so far this year. So the floor, is much lower with that in mind. We can take a look at the schedule adjusted stuff for the running backs. So on the season, it's not a bad matchup for Jordan Mason. Dallas is like 12th or so in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed to the running back position. So that is positive and looks like more so on the ground than through the air, which is great for Jordan Mason. And then kind of a middling matchup for the Dallas running backs also. Fine kind of matchups across the board for these running backs. Looking at ownership for Jordan Mason at captain, 15% projected ownership. Yeah, it seems fine, I think. Wait, 16 and a half thousand in the captain spot. So he is one of the most expensive captains on the slate, actually more expensive than CeeDee Lamb. Like I would prefer CeeDee Lamb just because you have the PPR points. He's a little bit has a higher ceiling, I think, than Jordan Mason does. Now we've seen Jordan Mason have some big games, but I'm probably going to be slightly fading 15% ownership in the captain spot for Jordan Mason. Not a huge fade because we do have so much great value on the slate that I don't know for sure that I'm going to be coming in underweight to this number because, again, there are these 4 players that look great in terms of projection, the 2 quarterbacks, Jordan Mason, CeeDee Lamb. So maybe I don't really come in under this. We can try to build a lineup with Mason later, but I think the ownership is fair there. Not really huge concern for me. And then in the flex, Jordan Mason coming in at 40% projected ownership. I would guess I come in a little bit underweight to that. Now, part of that is I also typically like to leave salary on the table, so it becomes tough when he is that expensive. And I do just prefer CeeDee Lamb, like straight up. If I'm playing one of them, I'd prefer to play CeeDee Lamb over Jordan Mason. But no real issue with 40% going there. So we know that George Kittle. Wait, I don't understand what you're saying here, Jake. It is National Tight End Day, and every tight end has crushed it. Actually, I am not factoring in National Tight End Day, which was clearly a huge mistake on the main slate because every tight end absolutely crushed today on the main slate. It's one of those things. People kept bringing it up on my shows, and I just kept ignoring it, not really listening because it doesn't seem like a narrative that anybody should care about. But every tight end seemed to crush today, so maybe it's something to factor in. Regardless, though, I really like George Kittle on this slate with no Brandon Ayuk. I have not seen him on the field in uniform, Matt, but I saw some people tweeting that he was out there. I think I've seen a couple tweets on Twitter suggesting that he was out there. Spencer, is Neil drunk? No, I've not had any alcohol today. I am very sleep deprived though. Why? Why do I seem drunk? Okay. Getting back to it. Jordan Mason, strong play. Coming in with a lot of ownership. I straight up prefer CeeDee Lamb if you can only pay up for one of them. Kyle Juszczyk, I never really like Juszczyk. He always comes in a little bit too high owned. I expect him to come in too high owned on this slate. He already ruined us once on a showdown slate. Adam and I talked about like his absolute ceiling, and he basically hit his ceiling where he scored a touchdown and had 3 catches. So it was like relative to his usual role. I think he maxed out all of his like both opportunities and also taking advantage of those opportunities in the game where we talked about like, yeah, he's just not a great play in general. Just looking at his season longs, hang on, let me pull up his name. ZCZ. Okay. Uh, Season logs. He maxes out at 1 carry. He has 2 total carries on the year. He runs a lot of routes, but this is the game I'm talking. He had 4 targets in that one game, and this was a showdown game, and I hated it. But he got those 4 targets. Also scored a touchdown late in that game. But on the season, not targeted all that much. 3, 5. I mean, I guess those are pretty strong. 8, and then 9, 10, 14, 15 total targets on the season. He has had, I guess, three games with 3 to 5 targets, which is promising. He's playable, but he always gets ownership. People just love slamming juice in there. Projected for 13% ownership. It's fine, but I just, with Zeke right there and Dalvin Cook cheaper, I'd just sign up for those guys before Kyle Juszczyk. Like he could. We saw him. He scored a touchdown, had a couple catches. Could happen. He could put up 11, 12 fantasy points, and if he does, you'll want him at 2,000. But with the ownership being there, he's probably not going to make my player pool. I'm probably just going to play the Dallas guys instead. I don't think Isaac Guerendo. 7,000 is the price tag on Isaac Guerendo. I think they priced him up because Jordan Mason was questionable earlier in the week. I don't available for Isaac Guerendo with so much other value on the slate. The ownership is going to be like non-existent, so I guess you could play, 6.5%. That's too much ownership for Isaac. If he comes in anywhere near that, that is a, very, very fade for me. But I think that is enough about the running backs. Again, love Zeke, Dalvin Cook, and then the rest are kind of, I mean, obviously Jordan Mason looks good, but look up. Let's see. Just catching up on chat. All right. Talking about Delvin. Yeah. Okay. King Judah says, I feel like sports is all politics, no telling what might happen. It's a gamble. I mean, it's definitely a gamble. That's we learned that today. Just things never go quite as planned. We can spend all day researching. I mean, I didn't spend all day, but I spent hours on this slate trying to research what might happen, and then just right before the show, we find out Rico Dowdle is going to be inactive, which I love it. I love when that kind of late breaking news happens. But we are all guessing. Nobody really knows for sure. The best we can do is just look at what has happened in the past, try to guess. Read the coach speak, try to do our best to guess what is going to happen. But it's certainly no sure thing. Okay, let's move on. Talk about wide receivers. Everything, of course, starts with CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb looks awesome. He's going to have a lot of ownership. In the flex, 41.5%. At captain, we have CeeDee Lamb at 16%. I prefer 16% going to CeeDee Lamb over 14.5% going to Jordan Mason. I mean, I don't hate the Jordan. I feel like I'm making it sound like I don't like it. I might end up overweight to Jordan Mason, so I don't want to make it sound like I really don't like it. But I do. I prefer CeeDee Lamb straight up. He just, the fact that he's so involved. I mean, obviously he's a wide receiver. He's involved in the pass game. So just the PPR, bringing up his floor, bringing up his ceiling, all of that is awesome for CeeDee Lamb. We do have Jordan Mason could very clearly hit that 100-yard bonus, but it's going to take a lot for Jordan Mason. Without any passing game involvement, it's going to take a lot for him to pay off his salary. Whereas CeeDee Lamb, you can rack up 8 receptions, and it's just much easier if like you're just getting those 8 catches, add in touchdowns, yardage, et cetera, like that is great. So love me some CeeDee Lamb today. I will just take that ownership over Jordan Mason in general. The captain ownership, not a concern. In the flex, we have CeeDee Lamb, and I'll start with the Cowboys side. So no Brandon Cooks. So that's kind of the big news. And some of these Cowboys receivers early in the day were some of my favorite receivers. Now with Rico Dowdle out, it makes them, like, I still like them, but makes them slightly less appealing. Maybe not, because maybe they just pass all game. But CeeDee Lamb, 41.5% projected ownership in the flex. Jalen Tolbert, 24.5% projected ownership in the flex. And then we have Jalen Brooks at just 9% projected ownership in the flex, and Kevontae Turpin, 9% projected ownership in the flex. So let's take a look at their usage from last week with no Brandon Cooks. And actually, let's take a look at schedule adjusted for receivers. It is a pretty bad matchup for Dallas receivers, according to this metric. Now, I believe it was actually a positive matchup for quarterbacks. Kind of interesting when you see that kind of offsetting stuff. Yeah, I don't know how to make sense of that. Maybe, I guess rushing quarterbacks is how it's been slightly positive for the quarterbacks. So that doesn't really help Dak. Regardless, I'm not super concerned about the matchup for Dallas. Doesn't look great. It's a bottom 6 matchup in terms of schedule adjusted fantasy points allowed. I still think that they're good enough offense that they should be just fine here. Slight dock maybe. Let's take a look at the usage though from last week, because I believe last week was the first week without Brandon Cooks. Wait, he played in week 4. Have they had 2 weeks without Brandon Cooks? Maybe they have, unless I'm missing him. Yeah, okay. They've had 2 weeks now without Brandon Cooks. Interesting. Okay. I thought last week was their first week. Well, over the past couple weeks. So last week we had Jalen Brooks ran 69.4% of routes, had 6 targets. So pretty strong usage last week for Jalen Brooks. Now it was against Detroit, and the game was a blowout, so that could have affected things somewhat. Kevontae Turpin, 42.9% route participation. Jalen Tolbert, 94% route participation. The week prior, though, Jalen Brooks still 40%. So it wasn't like he was a 0 route participation in that game with Pittsburgh. Jalen Tolbert, 82%. We did not have Kevontae Turpin, 33%. So the route participation came up a little bit last week for Jalen Brooks. What was the final score of that game? Now I'm actually wondering if it was. If that may have affected the route participation a little bit. So let me actually I'm going to limit this to. I'm going to look at just the first and second quarter here. In week 6. Because that might be, I may have. All right, let's see, week 6 by quarter. Jalen Brooks. Okay, so Jalen Brooks in the fourth quarter, 93.3%. Kevontae Turpin, 67%. And CeeDee Lamb was down. So this is clearly a result of the blowout this quarter. In the third quarter, CeeDee Lamb still running all the routes. Jalen Tolbert running all the routes. Kevontae Turpin was not. And Jalen Brooks was. Yeah, Jalen Brooks in the third quarter, 83.3%. So I think the Jalen Brooks stuff, he's running all the routes with CeeDee Lamb and Jake Ferguson. That's a good sign. And Kevontae Turpin was not. So pretty clearly, in the second quarter, we had Jalen Brooks 36%, Kevontae Turpin 45%. Okay. First quarter, Jalen Brooks 54%. So, it was not all just a result of the blowout, I guess is my takeaway here. Like they were running routes earlier in the fourth quarter. They may have been slightly inflated by the blowout. But I think that's all pretty promising that both were involved somewhat in the first half, and continued to be throughout the game. All right. Game day says, we'll take a look at the order. It's possible. Maybe he comes in higher owned after all of the quarterbacks went off today. It's possible that he comes in higher owned than he's being projected, but he's not being projected to be crazy high owned at least. All right. Let's see. So getting back to it, here I'm going to remove this quarter stuff. We'll go to all weeks again. Okay. So ultimately, I think Jalen Brooks looks awesome. Like he has had pretty strong involvement, not really getting much ownership, and he's only 1,200. was my one of my favorite plays on the slate before the running backs opened up. I still think he's a pretty strong play at 9% projected ownership. Might get squeezed with those running backs there. So I do really like Jalen Brooks at 1,200. Obviously, Jalen Tolbert, early in the day, I had him as somebody that I was going to kind of reluctantly fade. I'm kind of moving off of that now with the running back news. I think I'm going to be kind of just matching the field a lot of places and jamming the Cowboys running backs is probably how it ends up going for me. So he goes from somebody I was probably going to fade slightly to I don't actually like the ownership is pretty fine on Jalen Tolbert. So I don't really want to recommend fading it. Like I think that's totally reasonable ownership. Relative to ownership, like I think Tolbert, that's fine ownership. He's probably my least favorite relative to ownership of the Cowboys because I think his ownership is just reasonable. Like I don't think it's too low or too high. I think he's just like that's about a quarter of the field should probably have Jalen Tolbert at 6,400. He is the wide receiver 2 on the Cowboys. It might even be a little bit low actually. Doesn't stand out quite to the extent as Brooks sub 10% projected ownership. Turpin actually might be my least favorite of the group now because he's more expensive than Jalen Brooks by a good amount, doesn't run all the routes. So I guess I would probably rank them factoring in ownership. I mean, CeeDee Lamb is just kind of his own thing. Like he's a great play at, high ownership, a high price tag. You just know what CeeDee Lamb is. Jalen Tolbert, I've come around to it. I think that this is actually a decent number, 24.5%. Really like Jalen Brooks. Kevontae Turpin kind of you can sprinkle him in large field GPPs, but he's getting 9% ownership. He should be lower owned than Jalen Brooks. Just looking at the price tags, the usage, like Jalen Brooks should be getting, I don't know, at least I'd say triple the ownership of Kevontae Turpin, I think. And he's not. So much prefer Brooks and Tolbert and CeeDee Lamb. I think Turpin is a mix him in, but he's the type like he could score a touchdown and still not be optimal at 4,800. I don't think he's going to have a ton of usage. Looking at his game log, he's just never really been a full-time player. I don't really think he's going to be. He's fine, just not a huge priority. I prefer Brooks, who again last week we actually saw come in and had a pretty significant role with no Brandon Cooks out there. Was running 69% route participation, 40% the week before. Like, that's not awesome, but at 1,200, that's still totally reasonable amount of usage. And he had 6 targets last week, so a lot of promising signs for Jalen Brooks. Prefer him over Turpin if you're going to one of them. And then on the San Francisco side, so we obviously Brandon Ayuk out for the year, no Jawan Jennings this week. Deebo Samuel has pneumonia or had pneumonia. He's been cleared. He's going to play in this game. Still some concern that Deebo is going to be somewhat limited. It's not going to stop me from playing him just because he is, he's used in so many different ways. He's used as a running back. He's used obviously as a receiver. Deebo is awesome. RDS Deebo on a limited snap count. I don't think they've said specifically. I would kind of expect him to be somewhat limited. I'm at least like I have concerns that Deebo is going to be limited because he's had pneumonia, was in the hospital for I think a few days. So yeah, I think it's reasonable to have questions about Deebo. I don't know if you saw Adam Levitan's tweet about Deebo's usage when Ayuk is out. Just it's massive. Like he gets such great usage when Ayuk is out. Typically, decoy Samuel. That's good. I mean, he might be. That's the struggle with Deebo. Is he's in a smash spot without Ayuk here. Should be awesome, but also some concern that he's going to be somewhat limited. All right, here we go. Not says Tim says Deebo looked fine early warmups, did some sprints, ran some routes, was smiling a lot. Yeah, I mean that's great. All right, saw a tweet saying Deebo was dancing during practice. Yeah, okay, cool. So you guys are not concerned. I'm not super concerned about it either. I think Deebo, and I guess as we're talking about Deebo, I should transition the sidebar from running backs to receivers a little bit late here. Yeah, I think Deebo looks pretty strong. I'm not super concerned because he's active and he's Deebo. He's going to want to play through it. Deebo always wants to play. He's a warrior. 36% projected ownership in the flex. I like that number. I think that is pretty strong. Obviously involved should have some PPR points. Also involved in the running game. There's a lot to like about Debo. He's cheaper than Jordan Mason by $1,000, cheaper than CeeDee Lamb. So again, just another player. Part of the reason I think I'm likely to end up a little bit light on Jordan Mason is just he's getting a lot of ownership and he's really expensive and he's not involved in the passing game. So it's similar to Kyron from last week against the Vikings, or actually this week on Thursday against the Vikings. I faded Kyron. He of course went off. So that's well within the range of outcomes for Jordan Mason. We know he has that kind of upside, but the floor is pretty limited because he's not involved in the passing game. So I see guys like Debo and I'm like, the floor is at least should be a little bit higher just because he is involved in the running game and the passing game. And in particular, because he catches passes, that helps a lot in terms of boosting that floor and obviously helps with the ceiling also. So yeah, I like Debo at 36%. I don't know that I get above that number. I might even come in under that. I'm not 100% sure. I think that it's a fair number on Debo. Not a place that I'm taking a huge stand. And then at captain though, where's Debo coming in? I kind of like 7% captain ownership. I think I probably come in over 10% captain. So that's probably where I set myself apart more with Debo than in the flex. 7% seems pretty reasonable on Debo. And even probably lighter than it should be. So yeah, I like that number on Debo. Ricky Pearsall, super interesting. So with no Brandon Ayuk and Jawan Jennings, he is the de facto wide receiver 2, I think, on the 49ers, coming in at 24% ownership. He's 5,800. So now you ask yourself, who do you like better between Ricky Pearsall and Jalen Tolbert? Honestly, it's pretty close for me. Pearsall had pretty strong usage last week. Season debut. And he comes in and immediately has 5 targets on 81% route participation. And that's with Brandon Ayuk playing like half the game for the Niners. So yeah, I really like Pearsall today. I think he could be pretty good without Jawan Jennings, no Brandon Ayuk. Like the role should be pretty real for Pearsall. Actually, I should show you all of the Niners last week so we can take a look at all of them. So Chris Conley, 70% route participation. Debo Samuel, he was also missed some of most of the game last week. So that, I guess that is, you could make the argument that should affect somebody here. But also Ayuk was in there for 43% of routes before he got hurt. Saw 5 targets before he got hurt. And I think Pearsall is still the likeliest to be the wide receiver 2 there on the Niners. So I think he's a pretty strong play, pretty similar to Tolbert for me, where I don't think I take any big stand there. Chris Conley, also 70% route participation. Let's see, where are we all lining up? Debo lines up all over the field. Pearsall split between lining up out wide, lining up in the slot. Chris Conley more out wide than in the slot. Cowing 50-50 there. They're all kind of all over the place. So hard to know exactly how things are going to shake out now with Debo back and Ayuk out. But I'm pretty sure that it's going to be Ricky Pearsall coming in as a wide receiver 2, getting the second most usage behind Debo of the wide receivers. So I think the price tag looks pretty good for his role on the team. And then beyond them, Chris Conley, based on last week, I think is the wide receiver 3 this week. He is not getting a ton of ownership. 14%. That's actually come up a little bit throughout the day. So it's not the single digit ownership that we were seeing at one point earlier in the day, but I still think he's pretty strong at this number. Already says deep. Clearly he's proven that. All right. Those are our options. We're dealing with some chess stuff here. Good point. I think Pearsall pretty strong at ownership, and I also I like the 14% on Chris Conley. I don't love it as much as I did when he was projected for like 4% earlier in the day, but I could see him getting squeezed with people being more and more on Ezekiel Elliott and Dalvin Cook. I don't, he's going to be part of my player pool. I want to get to some Chris Conley, but I think this ownership feels about fair for him. I think this ownership feels fair on Pearsall. So I prefer, again, the Cowboys running backs are my big stand on the slate. So if I need to get rid of some of these guys in order to play the Cowboys running backs, I probably will. But I think that this is a fair ownership number on Conley. I'll probably try to get close to there. I'll also be leaving some salary on the table, so can't play all of the expensive guys. So yeah, I think I'll get to them. Somebody asked me earlier about Jacob Cowing. 4,000. I don't really think I can do it. Just doesn't really have that much of a role. We were hoping that he's going to become Tank Dell, but I don't think the 49ers are going to use him like Tank Dell, at least not yet. So I don't really think I'm going to get to a $4,000 count. If he was 200, he'd be a lot more interesting to me. But at 4,000, what happened here? Let me refresh. At 4,000, he's too expensive for not having much of a role. So I'm probably out on Cowing. Let me see it. Did anything change there? Zeke's still at 29% here in the flex. Yeah, I don't think I'm going to get to Cowing just because of the price tag. We have so many, pretty strong plays that are not getting a lot of ownership. I don't think you really need to go to Cowing. Ronnie Bell might be more interesting to me than Cowing. 38% route participation last week for Ronnie Bell. Yeah, I would prefer Ronnie Bell over Jacob Cowing. I think he's got a more secure role on the Niners. I'd be less shocked to see Ronnie Bell come out and run 65% of routes than Jacob Cowing. So yeah, I think Ronnie Bell pretty fair, and he's coming in at, again, sub 5%. So I actually think that's a pretty strong value play, a little bit cheaper than Cowing also. So yeah, I would prefer him if you're going to get to one of them. All right, I think, I don't think I'm going to any Ryan Flournoy either. All right, let's move on. Talk about tight ends. Of course, if you didn't know, it is National Tight End Day, so very important to talk about the tight ends here. Brooks or Lipke in single entry would be Brooks for me, is my preference. Tight ends. We start with George Kittle. Looks awesome to me. He is 8,800. Let's take a look at the schedule adjusted for tight ends. I don't actually even remember where he came in. I don't really care. I think he's just, with no Brandon Ayuk, I'm expecting a big role for George Kittle. It looks like it is a slightly below average matchup for George Kittle. I just don't really care. I think he's kind of matchup proof, at least to an extent. Actually, no, sorry, it's down here. So it is a bottom 7 matchup for George Kittle. So I guess more than slightly below average, but it's a bad matchup. I just don't care. And also Micah Parsons is out, which could affect things. I haven't even mentioned that yet. Yeah, no Micah Parsons for the Cowboys obviously helps the 49ers offense. I'm going to like George Kittle. I like George Kittle quite a bit, and he's not getting crazy high ownership. He's also just the kind of boom bust play that I love in DFS, particularly on showdown slates. He's not a comfortable click for a lot of people, and he's coming in at 5% in the captain. So George Kittle is maybe my favorite captain play. I mean, CeeDee Lamb is obviously up there. Like I like the expensive guys too, but like for a contrarian captain, I think George Kittle is possibly my favorite at 5%. Actually, Zeke at 6% now. That looks kind of good too. But I think Kittle is up there as potentially my favorite contrarian captain. Not safe at all. So I want to be clear. If you play George Kittle at captain, you are accepting a wide range of outcomes from him. It could totally sink your lineup if it's not a George Kittle game. But at 5%, if you're playing 20 lineups, I'd play, at least play 2 of them, George Kittle, so that you'll be at 10%, just double the field there. 27.5% projected ownership in the flex. Again, no Brandon Ayuk helps George Kittle quite a bit. Like you see when one of these Niner stars is out, it really affects the usage of the other Niner stars, and George Kittle should benefit here. Debo, I like quite a bit, but if you have any concerns, if you think Debo is at all limited, that should also help George Kittle. So I think that there are reasons to think George Kittle could have a big game here, more likely than usual to have a big George Kittle spike week. So 27.5% projected ownership. That's a spot I want to get on top of. 5% captain ownership. That's a spot I want to get on top of. I like Kittle quite a bit. Don't think I'm going to Eric Saubert because we don't need to. We have a lot of good value on the slate. We don't need to play the bad value. Jake Ferguson, I think he's a solid play. Also, again, it is National Tight End Day. In case you did not know, didn't hear me say it earlier. He's only 6,800. I believe he still has the second most targets on the Cowboys. Let me double check. Yeah, 34 targets on the season for Jake Ferguson, 71.7% route participation. All of that very good for a tight end, and missed a game also. So only 5 games played. I believe he also has the second highest target share on the team. He's only 6,800. Again, it is a pretty middling matchup. Looking at schedule adjusted stuff, I think he looks good. Honestly, I haven't given a ton of thought to it because I feel like the ownership is about fair on Jake Ferguson. But yeah, I think 29%. I have no issue with that ownership on Jake Ferguson. I could see myself going 10% in either direction from that number, just to get in some of the players that I love. But I think Jake Ferguson looks pretty good at 6,800. Is going to be involved in the game plan for the Cowboys. There's also a possibility that with no Rico Dowdle, they do just lean more on the pass, that they just run the ball less if they don't trust their vets that are in there now. And maybe we see, you know, rising tide lift all. Ferguson, CeeDee, uh, Jalen's both on the Cowboys. So that is a possibility. So yeah, no issue with the 29% going to Jake Ferguson. He gets the second best usage on the Cowboys. Looks pretty good. I don't know that I'm going to Luke Schoonmaker. Let's see. What did you do last week? Luke Schoonmaker. Just 8 routes, 16% route participation, 0 targets last week for Schoonmaker. Week 5, 22% route participation, saw a couple targets. Yeah, he's just a classic backup tight end. If he scores a touchdown, you'll probably want him. Probably won't score a touchdown. So you probably aren't gonna hurt to not have him. Yeah, that's a good note from Mr. TD. Is today National Tight End Day? It sure is National Tight End Day. Important to know. Um, okay, I think that does it for the tight ends. So then we can move on to kickers and defense this time. Move this down, and I think the kickers and defenses look fine. There are so many good value plays on the slate that I don't like love them. It's not a spot where I feel like I'm like, okay, there's nothing else great, so I'm just going to play the kickers and defense in this bed. Like there's enough other value. They could get lost in the in all of the other values, so maybe they don't get much ownership here. 49ers 16% ownership. I don't hate, I think that's a good number. Um, Cowboys 11%. I really like that number. At 3,400, 11% ownership for the Cowboys. I mean that is really strong. They haven't been great this year, but cheap enough. We've seen Brock Purdy have those 3 interception games. So I actually really like that number. 11% on the Cowboys defense. That's a number that I will try to get on top of. Carlson coming in at 14%, Brandon Aubrey coming in at 17%. Those both, I mean, they're so expensive now. The kickers have been priced up so much. Those seem like fine numbers, but if I end up having to fade the kickers in order to play all of the other unowned value that I like, I'm willing to sacrifice my kicker exposure. They've been crushing us all year if you don't play them. I mean, I guess I benefited from it to some extent because I often do play a lot of kickers and defenses. But on this slate, I think I'd rather play some of the other better value and just hope for the best because they're going pretty low owned. So I think the only one that kind of stands out to me is this ownership on the Cowboys defense does look a little bit light at 3,400, 11%. Like I'll try to get double that, I think, for the Cowboys defense. But man, we're dealing with some bots here today. So let me just delete those. Delete these. Okay, good. Take a quick look at FanDuel, and then I will. You guys can ask any questions as we go here. I'll play around with some lineups after we take a look at FanDuel. Okay, so start at MVP. What stands out? Mason 21%, Purdy 18, 19%, Dak Prescott 15%. I kind of like that number on Dak 15%, CeeDee Lamb 11%. I love that. Like just bet on CeeDee Lamb being the highest scoring player in the game. I think it's pretty likely. So I like the 11% on CeeDee Lamb. Often, on FanDuel, I just find myself like, yeah, the top exposed, like top ownership at MVP, I'm not like super into. You can generally find some more contrarian players that are honestly not much worse. Like in CeeDee Lamb, 11%. Debo, 6.5%. That looks pretty good. Zeke, I mean, man, 4% seems okay. That doesn't like stand out to me as an awesome number. I think I prefer him on DraftKings maybe, because he's 9,500. You need him to be the high scoring player on the slate. I think it's a fine number. I'd rather play Kittle. To me stands out. 4% Kittle. I really like that number for Kittle at MVP on FanDuel. Ferguson looks okay. I don't know. Don't need to get too different at MVP because you can just play 4% Kittle or 4%. Sorry, 6.5% Debo Samuel, 11% CeeDee Lamb. Those are some of my favorite MVPs on FanDuel. In the flex, yeah, CeeDee Lamb is 25% projected ownership. I think that's fine. It doesn't stand out as much to me as the price tag on DraftKings, or the ownership. Like I think that is a solid number, but not like a number that I need to crush to get over. I think I might come in over 25%. It just doesn't stand out the same way it does on DraftKings. Jordan Mason, 32%. Don't hate that number here, but I still prefer CeeDee Lamb. But the PPR doesn't hurt you for a guy like Jordan Mason who's not involved in the passing game. It doesn't hurt him as much on FanDuel to not be involved in the passing game. 17% Pearsall. That looks pretty good to me. I like that number. Tolbert only 16%. I actually really like that number on FanDuel. That has come down throughout the day. That was in the 20s earlier. Yeah, but 16% feels pretty fair for Tolbert. I think I'd probably get on top of that number on FanDuel. Conley 8% seems pretty good. Brooks again, 5.5% going to Brooks. He should be part of the game plan, I think. So I really like Brooks at 7,000, 5.5% ownership. That stands out to me as somebody I'd like to play. Is Delvin Cook not even on? Oh, here he is. 16.5 going. Oh man, he's also the min price. Yeah, I don't dislike that either. So you've got Cook at min price 16.5%. I think is pretty strong. Brooks stands out as just a great like contrarian dart throw. Scores a touchdown. You're probably going to want him. So he looks pretty good. Yeah, I think those are the plays that stand out to me. Nobody else really standing out. Conley's fine, not a huge priority. But yeah, some Cook, some Jalen Brooks, both look pretty strong. Kittle 20% in the flex looks good. Yeah, a lot of good plays here on FanDuel. All right. See if I have questions, and I'm going to play with lineups here. Yes, Kittle is playing. What was Delvin's projected ownership on which site, Nicholas? On DraftKings or FanDuel? I think it was, let's see, I'll just pull it up. On FanDuel, Delvin, 16.5%. On DraftKings, I believe it was not much higher than that. I think it was like 18, 19%. And that's like kind of the same around the industry. Got to find this slate again. Okay, it's up to 23% here. I think it's actually lower other places. Let me just double check that. They all affect each other too, so it's possible that it has changed since the last I looked. In the flex. Yeah, other places have Delvin Cook sub 20%. So they're all kind of right around in that range, around 20% on Delvin Cook. It's only 1,000, probably the RB2, not necessarily, but seems that way. I probably don't play a ton of Lipke. I might play some in like if I'm playing 30 lineups, I might have 1 or 2 shares of Lipke. He's not a priority for me in the same way. Like I prefer, like I think I said he's my 4th favorite of the Cowboys running backs. So there's a good chance I just don't get to any Lipke. I think he's playable. I think he's a fine play, just not a priority. I prefer again Zeke, Cook. I think even Deuce Vaughn are my preferences. All right, let's play around with some lineups. So I'm going to start with a CeeDee Lamb lineup. And then I'm just going to go straight down to the running backs. Zeke. I think I'll just throw Cook in there right away too. Just get them both into the lineup. Or I could go Jalen Brooks instead. Brooks is super contrarian. Let me do that. I'm going to do, and now I have, look at all this money I have. I have CeeDee Lamb at captain, Zeke, Brooks, and I still have over 10,000 left per player. So now I can throw in Dak. Could throw in Mason. I'm not sure that I will. No, now I'll throw in Debo and Purdy, leaving 1,500 on the table. Beauty. Look at that beauty. Didn't even play Kittle in this one. I like Kittle quite a bit. But this is, looks like a pretty strong large field tournament lineup with CeeDee, Zeke, Brooks, Prescott, Debo, and Purdy. Now let's try another one. National tight ends day, we've got to play Kittle in the captain spot. I like Kittle at captain quite a bit. This game is also in San Francisco, so maybe they're pretty likely to do well here. Throw Purdy into the lineup. Still, I'm going to like the value here, so I'm going to throw in $1,000 Delvin Cook, 2,400 Zeke, both of them. Now I have 12,000 left per player. Throw in, I could go Mason and Lamb. Let's try that. 2,400 left on the table. No real correlation issues here. Obviously, Purdy throwing to Kittle. We don't have Dak in here. We only have one of Dak's pass catchers, so this looks like a pretty strong large field tournament lineup to me. Where could we upgrade? We could upgrade from Purdy to Debo. I think that would be a fine upgrade. It'd still be a strong enough lineup. Could upgrade from Zeke to anybody up to 4,800, but no need to. I think Zeke is pretty likely to outscore all of these. If you don't think Cook is playing, you could upgrade from Cook to, Jalen Brooks I like quite a bit. I'm not super into use check, so don't see myself doing that. You could upgrade, Conley, Bell, I just don't see any of these as actual upgrades. You could upgrade just straight up from Cook to Cowboys defense. Then you're not leaving any salary on the table though. This looks like a fine lineup, but it would be duped more than just take Cowboys defense out of there, play Cook. Now you've got both running backs from the same team. People don't love doing that, generally leaving salary on the table. So it's pulling a lot of levers that look pretty good here. Okay. Zeke captain build, if he can get a touchdown, he has. All right, let's do one more. I do have to go make my lineups then after this one final lineup. But that's it's kind of a fun one. I don't hate the idea of Zeke at captain, 3,600. Now you just play one more sort of value play. I said I like the Cowboys defense. I think that makes sense in a Zeke captain lineup. So let's do that. Now we can play. Can we just play all the studs? Lamb. Yeah, I can play whoever I want. If you play Zeke and the Cowboys defense, you can play anybody else in the lineup that you want. So with Lamb, go to Dak. Man, you can really leave some salary too, because Kittle could easily outscore both Debo and Brock Purdy, and then you're leaving 3,000 on the table. Now you could get up from, if you wanted to, up to Jalen Tolbert from the Cowboys defense if you want to use the entire salary cap. But this would be a way to leave some salary on the table. But, maybe that's a way if you want to play something that is a little bit more likely to hit. You could move from Cowboys defense to Ricky Pearsall or Jalen Tolbert. But you don't need to. I think that Cowboys defense could just outscore both of those. Still, this one leaves 600 on the table, probably a fine large field tournament lineup. You've got your quarterback, Dak is stacked up with CeeDee Lamb. So this one looks pretty strong to me also. Okay. I think I need to go make my lineups. I think Aubrey's strong enough on FanDuel. Not doesn't stand out, but I think it looks good to me. This is a good question. Who's your in? No, I wouldn't. So to be clear, I like the lineups that I built initially. But when you're leaving 3,000 on the table, then you have to think about is there a spot here? So I'm just going through the process of should I upgrade here? Are any of these do I prefer these players significantly more? And I think they have a much better chance of outscoring the player in my lineup. And I did not find that to be the case. All right. Do you prefer Zeke? I prefer Zeke over Aubrey, I think, on FanDuel. Okay. No, Neil is not with Stochastic anymore, biker. Okay. I need to get going, making my lineups. Appreciate you all for hanging out. If you haven't already done so, this is where you can find all of my Showdown content going forward. I'll be doing 2 shows tomorrow in the morning with Adam Ship My Money Share. We'll be doing a show on the Monday Night Football slate, and then I'll be doing another one before lock on that one. So please do subscribe if you're not already subscribed to the channel, as I'm trying to get to 5,000 subscribers by the end of the NFL season. If you like the video, comment, all of that is very helpful for the algorithm. Thank you guys very much. Check out the Discord below. And of course, if you haven't already done so, sign up for Fantasy Points. That is most of what I'm using here is at Fantasy Points. You can get it for 50% off using promo code Flannelverse. All right. Thanks, guys. I'll catch you later.